What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in today's video, I wanted to look back at Battlefield Bad Company 2. Talk about the history, talk about just how epic of a game this is, but also talk a little bit about game preservation and why I'm even making this video in the first place. You could say, well, Alex, it's March of 2010 is when this game came out that we're talking about. It's not an anniversary. I mean, it's been 13 and a half years, right? Going on 14, but why are we talking about it? Well, I'll tell you why we're talking about it. It's because this is another example of a game that's being basically erased. Now, with a little bit of a caveat because of the single-player story, which is what we're going to focus a lot of this video on. The single-player story, I think, is epic in this game, and you can still play this even when the game is fully removed. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's already been delisted from storefronts. You can't actually buy it. And on December 8th, the multiplayer is going away completely. Now, we've seen this before. I've actually made videos of other games that have kind of quote-unquote died, Knockout City being actually one example. And what tends to happen is like the modding community will kind of step in, and you might be able to play it with a group of, online enthusiasts in some sort of modding group, right? And that's great, but, in terms of like the large majority of players in the world, they're going to lose out on the multiplayer of this game. It's also being removed from Game Pass, so it was on Game Pass. That's actually how I played it. I'm going to get a physical copy so that I can have that single-player stuff to it. But in terms of if you want to get it right now, I think you can still get it on Game Pass, but it is going to be removed, I think, at the end of this month, so maybe just like a week or so after this video comes out. So the game will be, again, basically gone. Not entirely, but for the most part gone. And all that will really remain is the single-player story. So I bring that up just to, again, for like game preservation purposes. I hate that kind of stuff. I understand in terms of like the multiplayer server, and it's been long enough. This game does, for me and for EA, gets a general break because, yeah, you're going on 14 years, and I'll tell you, playing this game, I just replayed it, and I'll tell you about my history about it in a second. The multiplayer is largely dead, at least from what I played. There was about 7 people. Actually, I was one of the 7, so you're playing with maybe, I don't know, and I was playing on a Sunday night, like I was playing at a pretty, what I would imagine would be a peak time. So granted, not a lot of people are playing this game. That's fair. The game's almost 14 years old at this point. Multiplayer, the servers cost money. They don't want to do it anymore. I guess I understand. But the idea that now you're only going to have the single-player game, again, I wanted to kind of make this video on Battlefield Bad Company 2. And so let's look back at this game. Honestly, this game rocks. It really is so good. And my history with it is actually pretty short. I remember vividly my friend playing it. So I would go over to, and this is the same friend that we've brought up for like Halo in the past or Alan Wake in the past, same friend. So I went over to his house and he had either bought it or rented it. And I remember watching him play the story, at least like the first couple missions. I didn't play, or I didn't see the entire story of this game, but I do remember seeing at least the first part of it. And then, of course, the multiplayer. And this was really, like COD, I guess at the time I had already jumped into COD. Battlefield was new to me, and it was Battlefield 3. I actually have the physical version of Battlefield 3. I'll make a video on it at some point for sure, because either that or I guess maybe even Battlefield 4, like there's some really, really good Battlefield games that got me into the series. Bad Company, I would say, was my first literal look at it. I think Battlefield 2142, is that the name of it? The one where it's like a mech kind of thing for the cover or whatever? I actually owned that. My dad bought that for me for, I think, PC, and I didn't really like it, but it's also because I didn't really understand it, and I was probably in the age range of 9 to 11 or 12. Like I was young, and I just didn't kind of click with it. So Bad Company 2 was really my first good look at what the series, which is not really the best, like, because Bad Company is so kind of separate, or it became kind of separate as time went on. I don't even know if that's like the best look at it, but you know what? So much of what was in Bad Company 2, I think would then influence what we saw from the better Battlefield games. And what is that? Well, number one is destruction. Now, I actually also think, having played, again, from that point, from now Bad Company 2 onward, I think it's got maybe the best story in any of the Battlefield games, and I don't think that's a hot take. I feel like, from what I've seen online, many people appreciate the story of Bad Company 2. I think like towards the end, it starts to all kind of fall apart in the way of the story itself. Like it does like its motions. It's not surprising in what it does in terms of the action and mixing things up. And also behind the scenes, they announced this, EA announced this whole thing of pulling all these games down back, I think in like March or April. So we've had plenty of time to kind of prepare. I went back and I tried Bad Company 1. And I was going to make a video on Bad Company 1 first and then do Bad Company 2. Turns out I don't really like Bad Company 1. I found, where I'm going with this, Bad Company 2 takes everything in Bad Company 1 and makes it so much better, so much more digestible, where I love it. I love Bad Company 2. And then, like I said, especially the destructibility, really, you take it. Well, actually, number one, the destructibility in this game still holds up to this day. I think, and this is something that I think has been said, the like Red Faction, Guerrilla, like all those games back in like the late 2000s, so like 08, 09, and then getting into the early 2010s, that was maybe like the peak destruction era, right? Even you think of like Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4, like that's the time. That was the time. And nowadays, you either, I don't know, like there are some games, there's that one multiplayer, I think free-to-play game where like everything can kind of break apart, right? So you either have games where like that is the only focus of the game, or games that try to do it realistically and it just doesn't pull through. I guess my point is, this game came out in 2010, like 13 and a half years ago. And when you're going throughout that game, especially in the beginning when you're kind of new to it, and it's like, okay, well, let's see what this game has. And things are just exploding everywhere, but pretty realistically. When you're in tanks, when you're in helicopters, when you're shooting things, and they're exploding and they're breaking down, or when you're in the action yourself and there's just bullets, whizzing past your ear and explosions that'll blow up a cover that you have, or it'll make a hole in like a rock or a concrete kind of slab in front of you. It's incredible. It really is. And I think it holds up now, considering I played it now and I still thought it was epic, and that technology, not a lot of games do it. Really, not a lot of games do it. Now, there are some sacrifices in the sense of things have to play out, not like a linear way. Obviously, like one of the cool aspects of this game is things can play out slightly differently depending on the weapons that you have or the way you tackle an enemy. They might do something a little bit different and you might get a different reaction, but you're kind of funneled, right? This game is very much like the first game, although I do think this game does it so much better. You are funneled into objectives. So it's not, there are actually a couple spots where it's like a little bit more of like an open world, quote unquote, but generally you're funneled through. So there's some sacrifices generally there, but it makes up for it because everything reacts. And it's just so cool to see. I also think this was still an era, having, I'm going back and I'm playing so many of these games, obviously, for this channel. This is an era that still holds up pretty well, even with like a realistic kind of screen over it. Some depends on the art style, right? Some art styles that, like a Sly Cooper, I think will always hold up because of how it looks. But a game that's more realistic looking, like say a Bad Company 2, that will, degrade with age. And I think we're still in an era where it looks fine. It doesn't look incredible. There are some sequences, actually, though, where it does look really, really good. Some of the night missions look really nice. Depends on, I guess, where you are. But it has, like, the high-octane action. And what I respect so much about the single-player campaign is, although, again, funneling you through an objective-based, it switches things up rather, like, often, I guess is the word I was going to say, quickly. It does do that, too. Like, you're never really doing the same thing more than once, kind of back to back. And that's what I found I absolutely hated with the first game. Again, you could see a lot of the foundation in the first game for sure, including the characters, Marlo and all them. Like, they're a really solid, I wouldn't call them, like, incredible. I was kind of waiting for them to be, like, super, super good. They have their moments. They have some really good comedic moments. There is some emotion there. There's, like, a brotherhood kind of formed, and, you get their kind of coming together, right, in the first game. This game, they're all just already there, and I wasn't really pleased with how this game ended for them, but we'll talk about that as this video goes. But generally, they are a good cast of characters that I do think potential to have been, better. The story was fine. Again, like some COD games, I feel like the stories are also fine. Look, I don't play these even single player. I normally play these single player story missions for these shooters, kind of just for like the set pieces, the bigger things. And then if the story grabs me, that's great. The story itself of like the weapon didn't necessarily, because it's kind of, again, it's by the books, and especially by the end, it really becomes by the book. I think where this game really shines is the brotherhood, kind of the funny, bickering back and forth, a little bit of the edgier humor that I don't think would even fly nowadays, and then also the diversity of the missions back to back, and then also I guess the destructibility of it. Plus, it's just a really solid shooter. I'm terrible at shooters, so I died so freaking much in this game. I was playing on normal. That's just me though. I'm literally terrible, and that's probably why I've like largely fallen out of it. The only ones I've ever been good at is like Resistance, the Resistance franchise from PlayStation. I was always legendary, including multiplayer. Like I would light it up. But maybe I was playing with other people that had no idea what they were doing either. But no, this game is really, really fun. In terms of like the mission variety, this game, number one, it starts out so good, dark and in the past, and then it jumps to present time, and I don't know, like the visuals, like I said, still hold up, and that really does help it. But the fact that like 1 minute you can be going down this tunnel-like thing and all these buildings and destruction, and then all of a sudden you're in a chopper, or then all of a sudden you're in a vehicle that's racing. And I mean, like the controls are pretty solid, but they're also kind of scary, where I fell off the ledges quite often. Like the game just keeps throwing stuff at you, whether you're on rails or whether you have some freedom. And I think that freedom part is really important, and it's also really important for Battlefield. There are a couple moments where, I think I used the destructibility in a way that they wanted you to, but it's not like right in your face. What I mean by this, there's a couple moments where you're kind of in more of these like jungle-like areas, and there's like these cabins, right? And I was getting attacked by an enemy. I ended up going underneath the cabin and shooting through the floor. And because mostly everything, is destructible in this game, I killed the enemy. And I didn't do this all that much from like that sneak attack kind of perspective, but doing it, I think I literally like paused and I was like, that was awesome. Like that is something that you really just don't see, because you're mixing in the core mechanic of destructibility with just kind of doing your own thing. And I mean, I handled things very like straightforward. Like I would try to flank, I would try to get kind of behind them. I would use my cover. I would try to destroy their cover. Like I would use some strategies, but again, I'm kind of terrible, so I'm not like the best case study of it. I'm sure you can go nuts. Normally, how I experienced destruction in this game was against me. So I'd be hiding, and you would just see all these freaking explosions, and everything around me would be blowing up. There is nothing really more satisfying than like being in the corner of inside of like a house, and then either a grenade or a rocket or whatever hits that corner, and the whole thing just explodes. So you were hiding behind two solid walls, forming a 90-degree angle, and then it's just gone in a second. There's nothing kind of more cool than that. And then realizing, oh shoot, I gotta go somewhere else, or oh shoot, I gotta go somewhere where the destruction really is not gonna affect me, like kind of underneath a building, like to the corner edge of it, because they can't really shoot over it and it's not gonna break, so like it'll be fine. But like anywhere else in this game, you are kind of like, you can't stay there for all that long. And I don't know, there's just something really cool about it. Sure, other games have things like that, or you'll be behind a box and the box will explode or just kind of disappear and you'll have to move. But this game, everything just feels so dynamic. And again, like Battlefield 3 was my first real like, oh, I love this series. Battlefield 3 is what replaced COD at the time. I played COD growing up, not really, I would say growing up, but maybe like 10, 11, 12, like getting into gaming, so maybe, is when I played COD, okay? Then when Battlefield 3 came out, it was in the PS3 era. I had got the PS3, and I was like, okay, like this is the game, I'm going to try it out, and I absolutely loved it. And that was the game to get me into the Battlefield franchise as like the thing, but then also replace COD, where if I were to say what my preferred shooter experience is, because I never played anything that was open. I never played anything where you would get into vehicles and you'd have different roles, and the roles actually mattered, right? That never like existed to me because I played COD. And then seeing, I mean, I'm not saying like, I mean, I do think Battlefield is better, but that's me. That's my preference. Other people think it's the opposite way, and that's totally cool. And that's just when I kind of realized it was Battlefield 3. Well, so much of that was, I think that was 2011. So 2010 was this game. This game kind of, and I even like looked at the history of these Battlefield games. I don't think it really hit its stride until Bad Company 2. You know, before I think it was way too like shoddy to actually be considered like a legendary franchise. Now, you could also say what they've done recently with like Battlefield 1 and stuff, and even Battlefield 2042, not great, but this wasn't their peak. Their peak, I think, was right after this. But this started it. This was really the beginning of it. And I think from the story perspective, it was probably, because, you know, I can kind of remember the stories of some of the other games, and I think this one is probably the best, or at least the best in terms of diversity and moving you around. And I don't know, I just had a blast with it. Also very short, like 3-4 hours long. Like, it's not long at all. Weapons are your collectibles, and it's a different feeling. Like, it's a different era that we're in gaming when you go back to play this game. And then I really briefly want to talk about the multiplayer. Again, I really can't, because all I can say is, well, I remember playing it and watching my friend play it back when it first came out. And I remember it being, and then like Vietnam, the Vietnam expansion was, from what I remember, massive, and just adding all of those things to it, really changing the, not necessarily dynamics, but just, I guess, like adding so much to this game. Also then taking everything that the single player did so well, throwing it into multiplayer. What I respect about this is actually kind of the simplicity of it. Even now, like playing it, yes, there's nobody playing it online, but the classes, straightforward. Even like, when I say straightforward, even like the menus, even like how you look at it. I think modern day, just games in general, like you try to play Destiny 2 now if you've never played it before, you have no idea. I think just like the layout of screens in games, games like this, more recently, are terrible, especially to new players. They are awful. And so it's just refreshing to kind of go back and say, oh, everything's right here. Oh, the modes, there's not too many modes to choose from. Granted, nobody's playing them, so there's even less modes to choose from. Like, I like it. I respect it. I honestly respect it. I think it's a product or a byproduct of the era. So giving credit to it, I mean, that's kind of just what it was like, and then it kind of got more sophisticated, I think more complex and harder to understand now, but I really respect it. And then as for, again, playing it itself, there's not too much to say. I feel like I was actually one of the better players in the match, and that's saying something because I'm terrible, so I mean, there's not much more you can really do, but you gotta just kind of respect it for what it was and think back to, okay, I can imagine, because you have all these vehicles, and again, like, this would have been one of the first really big attempts of doing this with all the different vehicles, and I just have to kind of imagine the strategy and playing as different roles and the vehicle use and capturing positions and stuff in Battlefield 3 on, just like put that into Bad Company 2. And this game, like, I guess what's sad, and I'll be honest, like, playing online, I thought there'd be more players. I'm not saying there were only 7, but like there's clearly not a lot of people playing this. I didn't think there would be like tens of thousands, but I did think it had somewhat of a player base. And I guess maybe I was wrong about that, because the game did so well. That's one I normally talk about sales and stuff in the beginning, but this game, as of 2012, so obviously, it would have slowed down considering barriers of like console generations and stuff, but as of 2012, it sold 12 million units. That is extreme. I mean, even for Battlefield, because even like the newer Battlefield games have not done that. They sell like 6 to 8, and then EA calls it a tremendous, like a colossal failure, right? So this game's selling 12, and that was 11 years ago. I don't know how much more it did, because you got to think 2013, I believe, right, was the PS4 and Xbox One, and then 2020 was PS5 and Xbox Series S and X. So those probably hurt it, and you're not going to be buying it after those. So I don't know, maybe it's done like 13, 14 million units like lifetime. That is incredibly good, and I think it's part of the reason why so many people look. It's got to be one of the higher selling Battlefield games of all time. Maybe it was beaten eventually, like, again, because I think Battlefield 3 is maybe looked at as the best overall one. I don't know the Battlefield fandom enough to fully say that, but I think Battlefield 3 is my favorite. But Bad Company 2 is probably right there because I was caught off guard. Again, like, I haven't touched, or I've seen it here and there, like, over time, but not, like, tremendously. And in terms of me, like, touching it, playing it, it's been, like, a decade plus, right? So having played it now, it's like, it still holds up. It really does. It still holds up. I know I like to do these kind of videos of if games still hold up. It really does still in 2023, and sad to an extent that the multiplayer is gone. Again, that is the primary reason, I suppose, that I made this video, is because in a way the game is dying. And I guess another thing you could throw in terms of game dying, yes, the single player is still, allowed or still there, but with it no longer being online stores, not just online, right? The multiplayer is gone in a few weeks, but in terms of you can't download, it's not on Game Pass, it's not on stores anymore. The only way you can play this is by getting the disc, just getting the disc, and then you have to do it for PS3 or 360, right? You have to go way back, and just that is also something that not a lot of people do at all. So in a lot of ways, like, the game, like, when you delist a game, especially now, like, you do almost kill it entirely. You kill it like 96% of the way through. And so again, that's RIP, Battlefield Bad Company 2. That's why I wanted to make this video, but I feel bad for it, but it certainly had its run, and it contributed to the best years, truly the best years of Battlefield. And I have no idea. And I mentioned, because, like, the ending, I didn't really like the ending because it sets up a third game, because, like, like, at least some of them want to retire, right? Like, they're done. They don't want to do it anymore. And then the very end, they're stopped by the general or whatever, and they say, the Russians are invading through Alaska, and when you're not done, and it just ends there. And it's like, ooh, so, yeah, that does make sense, because who stops at 2, right? When you make a second game in a franchise, who stops there? Normally, you'd make a 3 because you'd make it a trilogy, right? 9 out of 10 times. And I didn't see, like, the history of it. I don't know why they never made a third game. I think a third game would work easily. Now, again, like, the crude humor and some of the stuff between the company, I don't know if that would fly now. So that would probably be an issue, but I kind of feel bad, like, you just kind of left them there. And again, not that they're the greatest cast of characters ever, but certainly for a shooter, like a military shooter, because I think other like Resistance, I think, has better characters than it. But for like a military grade shooter, I think this has a really good cast of characters, and I feel bad leaving them, where you left them. It kind of sucks like that. So I was not a fan of that ending, even though, like, leading into that ending, like, going through the plane, I thought was freaking phenomenal, jumping out of it. Like, there's a lot of really great set pieces in this game, and then to kind of just leave it where you left it, not that great. But hopefully one day, possibly, maybe, we would get a Bad Company 3. I'm not going to hold my breath for it, though. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.